Welcome to the second hour of Hard Lens Media. I'm joined here with my other co-host, Paul DuPont. You might have seen him on a few of our live streams and some of our previous other work.
I'm around.
Yeah, Paul, good to have you here, man.
Good to be here.
So, this is something that's kind of been getting me angry. Just everyone has a little bit of a history of Hard Lens Media. We started like around the 2016 primary, essentially following the Bernie Sanders campaign, and it's quite clear that a lot of people still remember that election cycle. Of course, corporate media.
Bernie Sanders was really popular.
Yeah, corporate media was turning a blind eye to his campaign. And of course, let's not forget that the DNC establishment and Clinton campaign were working together to systematically do election fraud, thus denying him the nomination. A lot of people are going to say, well, he didn't have enough votes, he didn't have this, he didn't have that. But it's very convenient that there were very few debates, and that a lot of the government polling places and stations where people could vote were shut down, thus minimizing people a chance to actually go out to vote for him during the primary. And establishment media didn't help either. So after 2016, Bernie Sanders, what do? He kept on building his infrastructure, reaching out, motivating people to run for office and actually implement change. Because let's face it, Bernie Sanders isn't going to be around forever, and he wants to motivate people to bring real political change to this country. We have money in politics running amok. We have Citizens United, the McCutcheon's decision, basically saying that money is speech, corporations are people. And we have a neoliberal system in which both Democrat and Republican establishment leaders like to be a part of. They're friends with each other. They take money from Wall Street, they take money from the banks, they take money from big industry and the military-industrial complex and any other lobby group. This is the country we live in, and Bernie Sanders is a direct threat to this neoliberal system. And what is the consequence of Bernie Sanders telling people to get involved? Well, we saw in 2018 numerous progressive candidates wearing the title of being progressive or being democratic socialist, systematically taking key Democratic seats and even Republican seats during the primary and general election and bring real political change. Most notably, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is systematically making a name for herself, and really challenging the status quo there. She's actually being very transparent. And as we all head looking into 2020, it's quite clear that Bernie Sanders is a front runner. But yet, the New York Times was brilliant enough, smart enough to basically say that, and I'm going to quote from the article right here, Mr. Sanders may have been the runner-up in the last Democratic primary. Mind you, there was election fraud going on there. But instead of expanding his nucleus of support in the fashion of most repeat candidates, the Vermont senator is struggling to retain even what he garnered 2 years ago, when he was far less of a political star than today. I think a lot of the people in the establishment media, and I'm very sad to say the New York Times, is living under a rock. And it's quite clear that, and here's another quote right here, as Mr. Sanders considers a second bid for the White House, he and his advisors are grappling with the political reality that he would face a far different electoral landscape than in 2016. Rather than being the only progressive opponent to an establishment-backed frontrunner, the Vermont Independent would join what would be the most crowded, fractured, and uncertain Democratic Party in the last quarter century. Well, first, the political landscape has changed because Bernie Sanders is actually getting people to be motivated and be involved. He hasn't forgotten where he came from. He hasn't forgotten the momentum in which he has built his political campaign. But again, the establishment media is systematically saying that he is not a strong and viable candidate. He's probably the strongest candidate we've seen in years. Paul?
So, yeah, before we get too far into the article, they've inserted a couple of sort of fallacious arguments very slyly into those two statements. So, first of all, saying Bernie hasn't expanded, how do they put it, instead of expanding his nucleus of support. And what they really mean is he hasn't played ball with insiders, right? He's not gland-heading Tom Perez or trying to get, the support of already established political figures. And what they're saying is, oh, well, he doesn't have the support that he had at the beginning of the race at sort of this time during the last election. It's like, well, duh. Like, it was Hillary and Bernie. And, like, I don't think anyone really even remembered Lawrence Lessig or Martin O'Malley. Nobody really cared about those candidates. So it's really Hillary and Bernie.
Yeah, Lawrence Lessig didn't even make it on the debate stage. Even though he had the 2% necessary to be on there, but that's irrelevant.
But the thing is, this time around, they're like 20 people are considering, like, just mathematically. He's going to have lower percentage support just because there's so many people in here. And the other thing that those are the two big things in these two paragraphs that they kind of, I think, are shaping the opinion of the reader without really being honest about the figures. Like, they're saying the data doesn't support it, and I'm saying you're reading the data wrong.
And there's also another little clip that they actually add in here too. That's just it kind of gets me upset. There's no doubt that Mr. Sanders, 77, mind you, they say his age. They always say how old Bernie Sanders is. Biden is a year older than Bernie Sanders, but no one ever mentions.
He's 1 year younger.
Oh, 1 year younger. Thank you for the correction. Yeah, he's 1 year younger, but no one mentions that. Biden's 76. Should I keep on saying that too? On 1 year difference? Who knows? All right, so there's no doubt that Mr. Sanders, 77, will be one of the most formidable contenders if he does run. No other political candidate would start with the foundation of a 50-state organization, a small dollar fundraising list that delivered $230 million and undying devotion from a core group of backers. So I think that they're bringing it in there, just mentioning what he has done in the past, but also at the same time, they're just saying, well, that was what he did in 2016. That's what he did a few years ago. We don't know if he'll do it again. They're systematically telling you that he may not be as strong as he was. I would say that Bernie Sanders entering into 2020, he would be one of the strongest candidates to enter into that race. Now, everyone's talking about Joe Biden being the front runner, or Cory Booker, or Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. But, you know, a lot of people are seeing through the establishment lie, the neoliberal corporate establishment lie, and that is, we know that corporate Democrats and Republicans get along with each other. They are friends with each other, and people are tired of it. And so when Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, here you have a progressive who's talking about issues that affect everyone, and he was getting a lot of support. I only can imagine what 2016 would have looked like if the Democratic establishment didn't commit election fraud. But, Paul?
Yeah, when you look at almost any major news analysis of who they think the Democratic frontrunners are in 2020, they will almost always leave Bernie Sanders off the list, or if they even have him on the list at all, they'll have him like number 7 or number 8.
Number 3 or something like that.
Way pushed down. They don't really want to talk about him. And it's sort of crazy. Even this article sort of conflates the fact that, oh, well, there are a bunch of other progressives in the field that he has to compete with. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know what? There are kind of 2 other progressives in the field that, you know, people who were big fans of Bernie's campaign realize are just sort of not on board with his policy platform. So I think he still really does stand alone on that really firm sort of democratic socialist or really social democrat platform. But you're going to keep hearing those names. You're going to keep hearing Cory Booker, Joe Biden, Beto O'Rourke. You're going to hear... I saw 538, Nate Silver's website had a little video thing where they all chose who they thought was the front runner right now. And, you know, it was those names again. And they even went as far as to say, oh, you know, Klobuchar is going to be in there. I'm like, Klobuchar? What are you talking about?
Who's Klobuchar?
Senator Amy Klobuchar? Like, why? Why her? It's so ridiculous to me that and they keep trotting out these polls that all you have to do is look at the methodology. There's the recent one that they're like, oh, don't forget, Bernie doesn't have support of African-American women. Here's a poll that shows, you know, he only has, you know, 10% support from African-American women. I'm like, that's a poll of 222 Democratic insiders. Like, literally a third of those people are sitting Congress people. Not a third, but a group of them are sitting Congress people, Democratic donors, Democratic establishment people, staffers. You didn't poll real people. You just went around to your DC groupthink African-American women caucus and said, you guys don't like Bernie, right? You guys don't like Bernie? Yeah, African-American women don't like Bernie. That's not representative.
And not to mention, the establishment in Washington, D.C., they live in their own bubble. And the thing is, they're going to play by their own rules and create something that looks factual, and then establishment media then sells it out. Because we got to remember, the corporations that own the media also donate to a lot of Democratic and Republican senators and Congress people. So it's just... It's disgusting. And look, here's another thing to remember, too, from this article. And it's something I feel like that needs to be quoted. But unlike recent primaries, when a second-place finisher ran again and won the nomination, such as with John McCain in 2008 or Ms. Clinton in 2016, there has been no rush of new support to Mr. Sanders ahead of his formal announcement. Instead, the early maneuvering is striking for the large numbers of office holders, activists, and voters who want to wait to see how the Democratic race develop. And that roster of progressives includes many who backed Mr. Sanders 2 years ago. So,
because I think insiders aren't going to sit there and go, I'm endorsing this person more than 2 years before the election. Come on, we're at the very beginning of this, guys.
No.
People are withholding their endorsements until they see how things shake out.
Yeah, and another thing, too, Bernie Sanders is like a threat to the establishment because the Democrats would rather lose to a Republican than have somebody basically bringing a whole new deal for the working class citizens. For about, I don't know, since the beginning of the Reagan administration up until even with Trump, and including the Democratic presidents between that time period, all what these presidents have been doing is systematically keeping Wall Street happy, the banks happy, the lobbyists happy, and it's just been nothing but trickle-down economics. We're being stuck left holding the bag, and Americans are struggling with student debt, financial problems with the housing market, and on top of that, numerous other issues such as low wages, health care. It's becoming a problem, and the middle class is shrinking in this country. And I think right now, Washington, D.C. continues to turn a blind eye. They want to keep the system going on the way it is, and it just can't. And a lot of people are angry. That's why in 2016, during the general election, Hillary Clinton failed miserably to rally the support from the progressives and independents that Mr. Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, garnered during the primary. There was no point to really reach out to him until the very end. And every state in which Bernie Sanders had won, specifically here in the Midwest, went to Trump. Clinton failed, the establishment failed to realize that you just can't run your race like it's 1992 anymore. There are real issues impacting everyone of every generation, and you can't afford to gamble with an establishment candidate. Bernie Sanders is respected amongst the international community, and a lot of people were, really upset that the primaries were rigged. And even when Bernie Sanders endorsed Clinton, it wasn't enough. You can have a strong progressive candidate who could fill a stadium with thousands upon thousands of people. But as soon as he endorsed Clinton during the general election, they could barely even fill up a gymnasium. And if you want to defeat Donald Trump, you need a strong progressive candidate that's going to rally people. And at the same time, too, don't be dismissive of progressives and independents and democratic socialists. I know that word sounds bad, but more Americans are identifying themselves as independents. And we've interviewed a lot of independent political leaders, such as the Greens and the Libertarians, and even independent political organizations like Democratic Socialists of America and Socialist Alternative. And across the board, people are tired of just going to the establishment Democratic talking point and the establishment Republican talking point. Mm-hmm. And the very fact that you have establishment media turning a blind eye and saying that, well, Bernie Sanders had his time, but now it's time for him to go. It's disgusting, and it goes to show you that the neoliberal system will do everything to make sure that their power is in check.
So the establishment media and sort of group-thinky centrist Democrat are going to continue to smear Bernie, and they're going to use the old white man line of attack, which is sort of three attacks in one very simple sentence. It's effective. It's maybe he's too old, maybe he'll die in office, which means his VP pick is really important. Maybe he'll, become unable to serve at some point, so be worried about that. He's white, which means maybe he doesn't, care about minority issues, and he's a man, so maybe he's sexist. And none of those things are really all that true. He's very, very...
And they did that to him during the primary as well.
Right, and they're using particularly the old part, which, let's be honest, if he won, he would be the oldest president, oldest person to be voted in. He'll be, 79...
Possibly, yeah.
That would be the oldest. That would be old. Like, I'm not lying. So his
well, let's look at most members in Congress. They're 80 or going to 80 plus.
Right. And so his age is not irrelevant, but that just means we need a good VP pick. Yeah. But what they will do is they will use that to say, but look, Beto O'Rourke, he supports the things that you guys support. Why don't you support Beto O'Rourke?
And he's a lie. And I'm pretty sure...
We did support Beto pretty early on. He made a pledge. He took the Justice Democrats pledge. He wasn't going to take any corporate PAC money. He took a pledge not to take any oil or gas money.
And he even was interviewed on the Young Turks as well.
He supported Medicare for all. Like, he was very vocal that was in his platform. And the reason that progressives don't want to support him now is he broke his pledge to not take oil and gas money. He hasn't broken his pledge not to take corporate PAC money. But he did break his pledge to not take oil and gas money. And his voting record isn't good when we started looking into that. But also he dropped his support for Medicare for all. Now he's on that regular establishment Democrat talking point, access to health care.
He backpedaled.
You're going to have access to health care. What does that mean, access?
No.
I have access to health care now. It's just really expensive.
Well, see, here's the thing. He's a guy who lied. He's a liar, and all he can, and people can see through that. So the very fact that people want to say that he's this young progressive and he's able to fight for everyone's issues and able to systematically, be the leader for the new 2020 presidential election cycle, people are more informed now. You just can't lie to them. The corporate media and establishment, political system, you're not slick anymore. We can see through it. We've been screwed over for years. Americans have been for years screwed over, and here's the thing. Whenever the establishment attacks Bernie Sanders, you have to look at it and realize that they want to make sure that they have their neoliberal corporate pick for 2020, and don't fall for it. And we guys remain vigilant. Paul, I know you want to have one
last point. Don't let them tell you, oh, you can't focus on policy like that. It can't be a litmus test. You can't have a litmus test for people because you're trying to be too purist. And what you'll notice is they always want to talk about, oh, his style, he's well liked, this is somebody people can get behind, and it's vapid. It's completely devoid of policy positions. It's because they lose on the policy positions, and they don't want you to have a litmus test and say, no, I want, the people that I elect to support the policy platforms I care about. I want them to support Medicare for all. But they don't want you to think that way because isn't he nice? Look at him rolling up his sleeves.
And he looks
he's
tough.
A man of the people. Like, I hate that. It's just personality politics, which is what they blame progressives for doing. They blame progressives for being personality voters behind Bernie Sanders, and it's like, no, we support him because he's really the only guy that's supporting the issues we care about.
Yep.
It's not his personality. He just happens to be the only one who's saying what we want to hear.
Yeah, and so there you go. But we're definitely going to follow through with this because, look, I remember 2016. I was there in Philadelphia. Myself and Daniel were there. And it's something I'll never forget because I knew walking out of the Wells Fargo Center that there was a 50-50 chance that Clinton could lose the general election to Trump, and that's what happened. She lost. I saw Bernie Sanders supporters, delegates, and volunteers being systematically bullied, pushed around, spit on. There wasn't peace and love. It was a very sad event to look at, and I'll never forget Philadelphia. And that's why we all need to get actively involved and do what we can to build a better future. Now, Paul, I know you got a story about disinformation that's happening. What's actually happening?
Yeah, so this is sort of fascinating, and I get into this when I talk with folks, particularly very Democratic-minded folks who are sort of plugged into the news. When it comes to the topic of Russiagate, to what extent was Russia involved in election meddling, and we can get into the weeds about who hacked what and if you can actually provide evidence for that. But oftentimes people will come back to, yes, but you agree that there was a disinformation campaign, right? That they purchased advertising on social media platforms to sway the election. And it's like, okay, well, I can admit that it was found that Russian companies like the Internet Research Agency, which is sort of just a troll farm, did purchase ads on these platforms. That's demonstrable. But what everyone always leaves out is 56% of those ads were taken out after the election was over, right? It's less than half of them that came out before the election was over, and they don't all support Donald Trump. They're basically just political incendiary memes of every brand and stripe. Gun nut, memes and Hillary memes and Jill Stein memes and Gary Johnson memes, just any kind of just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. It looks like it was mostly just a data farm, farming for information. It doesn't seem to actually be a disinformation campaign in the way that it's often touted. And what's hilarious to me is the amount of money that actually went into it is pretty small. It's dwarfed in comparison to what the two parties put into in just online advertising during the race. It's funny, there's a great clip of the CEO, not CEO, but an executive from Google testifying in front of the Senate, and the Senate saying, oh, thousands of dollars were spent, and how did you figure out where they came from? They're like, yes, we did a very thorough audit. We identified the accounts that appeared to be coming from Russia, and we're taking out advertising that was politically motivated. It totaled $4,700 worth of advertising. And the senator was like, $4,700? It's like, because there's this perception that it's millions and millions of dollars to make people, but it's not. It was a small amount. It's basically roundly debunked. And what's crazy is the organization called New Knowledge has been pushing this idea of Russian disinformation. They've got a group called Hamilton 68 where they're monitoring social media platforms to try and say, these are who the bad actors are. We think these are Russian trolls. And when you look into their methodology, it seems very sort of a ham-fisted, we're just reading a bunch of tweets and things that don't agree with our political bias. We think that that's a Russian troll because of who they shared and what their political ideology is. But all of this said, the two guys that started new knowledge are both basically former spies. One of them was at NSA, and the other guy was with the State Department.
Well, sounds like reasonable people,
right? So they don't have any conflict of interest, but they're sitting around, saying, "Oh, Russia disinformation. We can identify it. Hey, social media platforms, hire us so that we can tell you who the bad guys are, and we can help you get them removed." So it's like they're creating a problem so they can provide the solution, which is also pretty shady. Mm-hmm. But here's the rub. Here's what got it really going for me. This is a report from the Gray Zone Project, and they basically uncovered that there was a disinformation social media campaign in the Alabama special election in which Roy Moore was the Republican government candidate, mm-hmm. And they made a group of fake accounts to bolster a write-in candidate that basically no one knew about, a guy named Watts, to try and split the Republican vote. And then they started a botnet kind of, a bunch of bots online tweeting about and sharing stories on Facebook about how Roy Moore's campaign was being propped up by Russian bots. And he ended up getting banned from Facebook for this. So the guy that's going around saying there's a bunch of disinformation out there and it's Russia's fault, I can help you stop it, is sitting there involved in a political disinformation campaign in an election in Alabama. Like, literally banned from Facebook for the thing that he is purporting to be a champion of getting rid of. Insane to me. Just insane.
Well, it's what you say. It's like Russia, man. If there's one thing to learn from this is that the aftermath of 2016 is still here, and we're seeing it kind of crumble. The whole Russian narrative, for me, is just ridiculous. And it comes to a certain point where we got to realize our system is corrupt to the core. It was like that long before President Trump ever ran for office. It's a neoliberal corporate system, and so long as you have money in politics, you're going to have rigged elections, and most likely it's going to come from your fellow American companies and corporations that are buying our politicians. And so when they want to construct a narrative, all they do is spend, I don't know, a decent, $500,000 just to really get something up, correct the record if I don't want to mean losing the pun or anything like that, or saying something that a lot of people hate. But, I mean, they have this system that they build, and if they want to systematically fact-check everyone, they'll just create this fake account, this fake system with real shady people running it. And millions of Americans are thus misinformed about what really happened in 2016. And what really happened was Russia had nothing to do with it.
The really crazy and super frustrating thing about this is every one of these stories all along has been like, here's a bombshell, it's crazy, it's Russia. And then, a week later when a bunch of people are going, this seems like it's not well sourced, it doesn't seem like it's really accurate, and then it seems like maybe it's just not true, and then it turns out to not be true. Yeah. The retraction is always like really quiet and whispered under their breath. Yeah. And so I'll talk to people about things and they'll be like, what about this? I'm like, you mean the thing that was debunked and isn't true? The thing that they retracted? You're still going to use that as an argument? That's the repeated thing. Bombshell. Get everyone riled up about a thing. Hey guys, I don't think that's right. Oh yeah, it's not right. It's not right. Don't. Hey, another bombshell. Over and over and over again. And these guys are that exact same thing. And I'm just getting so tired. We're among the most propagandized two people on the planet. Mm-hmm. And more than I think ever before.
Yeah, I think another thing to remember too, that when you see this kind of stuff happen, you have to then call into question how everything was handled or how everything might turn out for 2020. Because I can imagine the social media storm surrounding the Democratic primary, and yes, even it's going to be a potential Republican primary as well. It's going to be a mess, and the wolves will be out, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the political landscape will be and how the primaries will be run, because I think a lot of people who wanted Bernie Sanders, especially for the nomination in 2016, are really going to be very vigilant. And the thing is, the establishment will do whatever it needs to do, even create another system just like this, to make sure that their narrative is continued being constructed. So, I, for one, it's just curious. I only can laugh at something like this right now, but I think as we move on,
before we switch topics, though, I want to mention. I often people will say, "Oh, your skepticism in this Russia stuff. Don't you think Trump did illegal things? Don't you think the Mueller investigation will come up with valid indictments?" I'm not saying that. it definitely will. There's all kinds of illegal things and corruption and malfeasance going on. But you look at those indictments and you look at the charges that are coming down, and you honestly tell me that those represent collusion between the campaign and the Russian government to elect Trump.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, campaign finance violations of Cohen paying hush money to a porn star. How does that have anything to do with the Russian government helping the Trump campaign? Like, I'm skeptical that anything concrete will ever come out that shows definitively, aha, the Kremlin was in the tank for the Trump campaign and was doing that to get him elected. I'm super skeptical that we'll see any evidence of it.